Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for the last in our series of the ACT Prep webinars. Today, we're going to go over science. I'm Mary Cook. I'm the ACT coordinator for Metro Nashville Public Schools, and I'm so glad you're here today. We have a great speaker who's going to share important information about the ACT with you. And also be sure to know that we are recording this, and the recording will be available on the MMPS YouTube playlist probably by the end of the week or so, but I'll also email it out to everybody once it comes available, along with some other resources. Teresa, if you're here, you're welcome to come on and give the information about how to turn on the closed captioning. There is closed captioning available in language of your choice. And if Teresa's available, yeah, I can see her name there, she'll come on and explain it to you in Spanish. If not, we will get you caught up on that in just a moment. During the presentation,
Yes,
you are... Oh, you're there? Okay, great. Go ahead, Teresa.
Yes, so si necesitan la traducción en español en vivo, pueden ir a la opción donde dice más o donde dice more, ir donde dice language and speech, hacer clic allí, y donde dice turn on live captions también pueden hacerle clic, y abajo donde están los 3 puntos a la derecha cambien el idioma a español, donde dice caption, cámbienlo a Spanish, a español, o el idioma que usted guste. And I'm also going to type it in Spanish in the chat. I think for some people it might be better, so I'll do that too.
No, I agree. I think you're right. All right, with that, I am going to turn the program over to our guest speaker. Let her introduce herself, tell everybody about the program that she's with. I will be in the background, so if you post questions in the chat, I'll be able to answer as Nina's doing her presentation. But we'll also take questions at any point, so you're welcome to come off from mute or type them into the chat, whichever you prefer. All right, Nina, this is yours.
Awesome. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Nina. I work for an organization called Oasis College Connection. We support students across Metro schools with all things college. So whether it's applications, doing research, or applying for scholarships and everything in between. I personally work at Antioch High School and Glencliff High School. So if you attend either of those schools, I'd be happy to chat with you. But we also have mentors elsewhere. So if you have questions about if there's a mentor at your school, feel free to throw it in the chat or unmute later. But I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen so we can start talking about the Science ACT. So give me just a second here. Content. Okay, there we go. Hopefully that'll pop up. All right, sweet. So if you guys could maybe give me like a thumbs up reaction or raise your hand if you can see that, or if anybody wants to come off mute and tell me you can see it. Cool, beautiful, thank you. All right, so like I said, my name is Nina Brown, college mentor with Oasis College Connection. Thank you guys for putting your hands up. You can put them down whenever you're ready. Also, quick plug for if you want additional ACT prep, not just today, or I think this is the last of the series. I and one of my coworkers teach an ACT prep course at 2 of the libraries in Nashville. So I teach one at the Southeast Library on Tuesdays from 4 to 5 p.m. The flyer for that's on the left right here. And then my coworker teaches one at the Bellevue Library on Mondays at the same time from 4 to 5. So there's the info there. You can scan the QR code to sign up for texts for more information. I'll also put these on there at the end, but those are cool opportunities to take practice tests and get some more information that way too. All right. So today we're going to talk about the science portion of the ACT. So your very last portion. Usually by the time you get to this part of the test, you might be a little bit sleepy, a little bit tired of taking the ACT. It's a long test. But the good news is, at least I hope the good news is, really the science section is, I think, the most about strategy. So the more that you can practice and get used to the science section, you really don't need to know that much actual science to do well on it. So we'll talk more about what the details look like. But if you can stay motivated all the way through the end of the science section, you'll be in good shape. All right, timing wise, there are 40 questions on the science portion of the ACT and 35 minutes to get those questions answered. So similar, I think exactly the same as the reading portion, still really tight squeeze there, a lot of questions to answer in a short amount of time. So timing is really important for the science portion. To get a 21 on the science portion, which is my general benchmark for college readiness, but not the only way to get a 21 on the ACT. But to score a 21, you need to get 25 out of the 40 questions correct, which is about a 63% correct. Also keeping in mind, as a constant reminder, you should never leave a question blank on any portion of the ACT, because if you at least guess, you have a chance of getting it right. You'll definitely get it wrong if you leave it blank, right, guys? So always answering all of the questions, even if you don't get time to get down to them. But getting 25 out of 40 right will get you a 21. All right, difficulty-wise, as I said when we started, almost all of the information you need for the science portion of the ACT should be in the passages that are given to you. It might be helpful to have some basic science knowledge to help you answer some questions, like general information about like scientific method, or terms like experiment, hypothesis, theory, etc. But generally, you mostly need to be able to comprehend the passages and the charts and tables that are given to you, and we can help you learn how to do that. But the best news is you don't have to memorize any science information necessarily. Nobody's going to ask you what the mitochondria of a cell is, or what a certain element on the periodic table is. Most of the information is going to just ask you to interpret what's given to you. Tested what, or like categories of what's tested. 3 main breakdowns are data representation and interpretation. So this is really a huge part of doing well in the science ACT, is your ability to look at graphs and tables specifically and evaluate that information, interpret it, answer questions appropriately based on that. The second biggest category is research summaries. Most of the passages are going to present some sort of experiment or theory or something like that, and they will summarize the research done by a scientist. And they want you to understand, evaluate, analyze all of the information from that experiment. So again, comprehension and reading. And then the third category is conflicting viewpoints, which we'll talk specifically about closer to the end of the presentation, but you might be given conflicting hypotheses or theories and different thoughts from different scientists, and need to compare those and answer questions about the difference. Cool. All right, as a quick reminder, we're about to jump into tips of like specific ways to approach the test. I want to remind you guys, I am not an expert in the sciences. Today we're focusing on tips to help you approach the test, to help you guess when you're running out of time. But if you have any questions about specific science-related content, I would encourage you to take note of whatever question you're confused on, or topic, or whatever, and go to your science teacher for help. I'm here to help you with tips specifically. And if you have questions about specific science things, I can try my best to help you, but I would encourage you to go to the experts who are your teachers. All right, so jumping into tips. Timing is so important on the science portion of the ACT because it's really tight, right? 40 questions, only 35 minutes. So the more you can practice, one, it's going to improve, but the more you can practice with some like timestamps, the better off you'll be, and the more used to you'll be using those timestamps when you're taking the test in real life. So a huge tip is to use your first 30 seconds of approaching a new passage to get the lay of the land on the data that's being represented, what the passage is telling you, etc. It's really not important that you read all of the text or interpret all of the data before you jump right into questions. Do a quick skim, note important words and numbers that stand out to you, and move on. You don't need to read in super detail each question or each passage, because you can reference the passage as you get to those questions, okay? Also, within the first 30 seconds, you want to just glance at the titles of the charts. Note if there are multiple sets of data or just one. and then always read the axes of the graphs and keys or charts to make sure you know what's being measured and in what direction. So we'll do some examples of that. I'll show you guys what I mean. But if you guys have access to the document that Mary sent out, that's just called or it's the approaching the ACT document, we're going to reference that. So if you guys got the email from Mary, that has the documents linked in there. There's an English version and a Spanish version. Now would be a good time to pull those up so that we can reference and practice together. So if
Just
you
so
guys
you
can,
know,
yeah.
Nina, just so you know, I linked them in the chat as well.
Oh,
So if you
amazing.
don't have access to that email, just look in the chat. The links are there.
You're right. You're far ahead of me. Thank you, Mary. So those are also in the chat. So if you can open those up and scroll on to page 44, that's the first passage of the reading or of the science section we're going to do. So if you guys can get to that link or document, once you have that, if you'll raise your hand or give me a thumbs up, that would be great. So I know when I can move into having you guys practice. Thanks, Jacqueline. Also, if you guys don't know where the raise your hand feature is, at the very top, there should be a little hand picture and it says raise. If you click that, it'll show me that you've raised your hand, and that way I know that you're on page 44 of the Preparing for the ACT document. Thanks, guys. Give you guys a few more seconds to get there. Thank you. All right, it looks like maybe half of you guys are there, so don't feel super rushed if you're not there yet. I'm going to go ahead and have everybody get started with the reading. So if you are there, you can go ahead and lower your hand. If you're not there yet, you're welcome to just take your time getting there and start when you can. Okay, so we're going to practice that 30-second glance over, getting the lay of the land. When you're doing this on your own, you can practice these ACT passages on your own, and I'll talk to you a little bit more on how to access those. But when you're doing these on your own, it can be helpful to get used to those timestamps, like I said. So right now I'm going to set a timer for 30 seconds. And if you guys will just look at page 44, and I want you to do these three things. Note important numbers and phrases that stand out in the text. So I have mine printed out right here. There's the text right here at the top, numbers and phrases there. Tell me how many sets of data there are, and then note what's being measured on the charts and graphs and which direction axes are going if there are axes on those graphs. Cool. All right, I'm going to go ahead and set a timer for 30 seconds on page 44. Get the lay of the land. All right, go. All right. That was 30 seconds. It's pretty fast, but hopefully you guys got to note some specific things. That's okay, Lucas. No worries. Welcome now. All right, so let's look. I kind of just gave you guys a little answer of what I noted, and hopefully some of the things you noted mirrored the same thing. I printed mine out. Probably when you're taking the ACT, especially if you're taking it at school on March 7th, you probably won't have a physical copy. So you can do this 30 seconds. You can work on it by highlighting with a highlighting feature on the test, or you could even maybe take some notes on the side of what you want to keep track of. But when I was doing this on my paper, I noted specifically from the text, one of 12 nutrient solutions that I underlined. I underlined the terms pH, nickel, iron, zinc, and then the phrase that says solutions 1 through 4. Those were the things that I wanted to note and keep track of in the text of where they were. For the second question of how many sets of data, there are 2 sets and they're labeled table 1 and figure 1. So that's important to know what the names of them are. And then for my third question of what is being measured, I said on table 1, they're measuring the dry mass of plants from species M and U. And they're changing the solutions, different solutions. And then figure 1 is measuring average iron or zinc content across different solutions. So that's very basic. I didn't necessarily talk about all the pH and nickel changes, but for my own brain, for that quick 30 seconds, I want to have a general idea of what to expect and what's being measured. And then I can go back for specifics later. This is just going to help you with reference. And the more you practice this 30 seconds, the better you'll get with that timing and what works for you, no bias. Okay. But once those 30 seconds are over, I would encourage you to just move on and start answering questions. So reading the questions and then referencing back as much as you can, time permitting, of course, because like we said at the beginning, the information that you need to answer the questions should be in the text and graphs provided. All right, tip 2, it's so important that you guys practice interpreting tables, graphs, and charts. So you probably have had the opportunity to practice doing this in some of your classes, but it's really, really important on the science portion of the ACT, and it's important that you know what different things to look for. So make sure you always note the names of the tables or charts, so the titles. So again, we're still on page 44, table 1 and figure 1. The keys and labels, which I highlighted in blue on this picture. So for table 1, it says solution, pH, nickel, and then plant species M and U. And then for the key on the line graph, it tells you exactly which line represents which species, as well as which element is being measured in that species. And then green is what is being measured. So as I mentioned before, average dry mass of plant species for table 1 is being measured, and then the average iron or zinc content for figure 1 is being measured. And then it's important that you know what units are being measured to help you understand and answer questions correctly, because that can be tricky sometimes. So there's micromoles on both for the nickel concentration, and then micrograms for iron or zinc on figure 1, and grams for mass. Anyway, these are all important to just at least know what they are. Whether or not you're labeling them or thinking super hard about what each one is called, these are important things to keep in mind and practice getting used to. It's also especially important when you're looking at these labels when there are multiple sets of data for one passage. So I'll show you why that's important in the next slide, hopefully. There we go. So this is a lot to take in. It was hard for me to get it all on one slide. But for example, it is important to note shared variables because both of these tables are representing a changing experiment or a growth in an experiment. So first figure was the first set of data, and it's measuring a lot of different solutions. So 12 solutions for 2 different plants, right? If you read in your passage, it says that figure 1 is measuring plants that were fed solutions 1 through 4. So on this, I'm noting which variables or shared data points are shared across 2 different charts. Does that make sense? So we see that solutions 1 through 4 in table 1 were measured with all of a pH of 7 and these specific nickel concentrations. We know that in figure 1, they were only using solutions 1 through 4. So all of the pHs were the same in those measurements, but nickel varied. If you're looking for why this is important, I don't think I included the question for time's sake, but there is a question that asks about that you have to use both of these data points for, and you have to know that in figure 1, they're using solutions 1 through 4 only. They have all the same pH, and you can tell which solution is being used based on the nickel concentration. So it's important that you're comparing tables and understanding what the overlap is so you can get the questions right when they're shared data points. I hope that wasn't too confusing. I'm not sure I explained it well. Maybe I should have included the question to make it a little bit easier. But if you guys have questions, feel free to unmute or drop it in the chat, and we can come back later too. But I hope that you see the shared variables across here. The text tells us that in figure 1, plants were only fed solutions 1 through 4 that were also measured in this chart. Okay. All right, so as I said before, there will be some questions that talk specifically about conflicting viewpoints. There's always going to be one conflicting viewpoint passage. Conflicting viewpoint passages will compare the viewpoints of 2 or more scientists. So maybe they have different hypotheses, maybe they have different ideas for experiments. You need to read all of their viewpoints and then answer questions about those viewpoints. My tip for this one is that this section usually takes the longest because there's a lot of reading. There aren't usually as many tables or charts for these types of passages. So there's a lot of reading and usually a few questions where you need to reference and read a little bit more carefully. If you don't like this type of passage, or if you know this passage always takes you a really long time when you're practicing, it's okay to skip it and come back. Practice going back and forth. See if you like skipping when you're taking virtual practice tests, things like that. Never practice and don't skip and forget to come back. But if it takes you a really long time, it might be better to save it for the end because it's the same amount of questions as the other passages. All right. Also, you don't have to waste time looking for it. So like if you're on, especially if you're taking it on the computer, don't click through all the passages and then say, this is the conflicting viewpoints passages, I'm saving it for later. Just maybe when you come across it, then maybe save it and come back. Yes, Mary?
Nina, we have a question in the chat. Is it worth any more points than the other questions?
Great question. So all the questions are worth the same number of points, right? So wouldn't you rather know for sure that you have plenty of time to answer a question and get it right than guess on a question that you're not sure you have the time to answer it right? So that's okay. That's why it's okay. And I would encourage you to strategically skip if you feel like you don't have the brain capacity. Remember, this is the end of the test. You might be like, I cannot read all of that right now. I need to take a break. It's okay to skip and guess and then come back to check your answers later. Because all the questions are worth the same number of points, right? I hope that answers your question. Yeah. All right, so we're going to practice this conflicting viewpoints, or at least take a look at it. So if you look at the first passage in this section, it's on page 40 of your handout, which again is linked in the chat and should be linked in the email that you got. This is an example of a conflicting viewpoints passage, all right? So when you're approaching these passages, whether or not you decide to skip it and come back, when it is time for you to answer the questions, you do not need to read all of the passage all at once. So if I were you, I would not start by reading all of this. I would start, however, by just reading the first intro little section. There will always be a short intro passage right here before it tells you the conflicting viewpoints. So on your paper, so page 40, if you guys are there, hopefully, it says passage 1, and then it says scientist 1, scientist 2, scientist 3. The only thing I would recommend you read first is just passage 1 before you get to scientist 1. So it's just a short paragraph. This information is going to be true for all of the viewpoints that are shared about the scientists. So that gives you a good intro as to what kinds of questions the scientists might be asking, what their hypotheses might be about. So it's okay to read that one first and then just jump straight into questions. So when we read passage 1, that little blurb at the top, we know that these viewpoints will probably talk about playas, which are flat, dry desert basins, and large rocks that move. And that there are 3 scientists that are trying to explain how these rocks moved. That's all I need to know, and then I'm going to jump right into the first question, okay? Also, now that you're jumping into the questions, I would only read the specific viewpoint that's being referenced by the question that you get to. So the first question asks about scientist 2. So I would not read scientist 1 first. I would just read the section on scientist 2. And based on that, I would answer the first question that's asking about scientist 2. Okay? Because reading about scientist 1 is not going to help you answer question 1 on this section. If you guys want, I'll give you 30 seconds. And then if you, I'll give you 45 seconds. If you want to read and then see if you have an answer to this question. So again, this is on page 40. You're welcome to throw a hand up. I won't necessarily call on you. If you want to throw an answer in the chat, you're welcome to. I just want to know if you guys want to make sure you guys have enough time to answer. So I'm going to give you guys like 45 seconds to at least think of an answer in your mind. And if you will raise your hand, that'd be great. I won't call on you or anything. Cool. When you have an answer, raise your hand. No, Kimberly, you are fast. That was good. Okie dokie. I have a few people with their hands up. If you're still thinking, that's okay. Does anyone feel super brave and want to unmute and say their answer or throw their answer in the chat of what they think it is? Anybody feeling really brave today? It's okay if not. I know we're in a virtual space. Maybe Carolyn's thinking about it. All right, we got a D in the chat. You guys maybe react to that message, Lottie's message, if you think that D is correct, or if you have another one, you could throw a new one in the chat, perhaps. All right, we got a thumbs up for Lottie's answer. All right, Caroline's typing, maybe not. All right, let's see how we're feeling. What's the answer? Lottie was right, great job. So mud and algae only. So you only needed to read scientist 2's viewpoint to answer that question. I highlighted there what the little phrase I found the answer in was. Thanks, Mary. Very good. So again, you don't necessarily have to read all of the portions. In fact, that would probably waste your time a little bit to answer the first question or the first few questions. So I don't know how many of you guys were here for the reading section, but I had a similar tip about the reading portion and where there might be multiple passages on the same topic and you answer questions. Unfortunately, for the science section, unlike the reading section, the questions don't always follow a chronological order. So not all of the first questions will be about scientist 1 and then scientist 2 and then scientist 3. They kind of jump around. You'll definitely have questions that ask about all of the scientists' viewpoints. So this question, question 2, is asking which of the observations is consistent, or this observation is consistent with which of the scientists' explanations. So you have to have an understanding of all of those scientists' explanations. If I were you and I were approaching the test, again, these are just tips for you to practice. Maybe don't practice this the first time you take the science portion. If I were you, I would probably skip this question for now because I haven't read the viewpoints of the other scientists yet. I would probably come back to it once I've read all 3 of the scientists' viewpoints and have a little bit more of an idea. But if you feel like you need to just knock it out and you want to skim the other passages, you can. But again, eventually you'll have to read all of the scientists' viewpoints for some of the questions. So you might as well wait until the end when you've read all of the viewpoints at once. Okay. One thought and tip that I have. Also is that, so right now we've read scientist 2's viewpoint, right? Only from question 1. I think based on scientist 2's viewpoint, after reading this question, I might have at least one answer that I might eliminate if I'm feeling like process of elimination is helpful for me. So based on my reading of Scientist 2's observations, I feel like Scientist 2 would probably agree that wind speeds greater than 80 miles per hour are needed to move the rocks in the playa. So that would mean that I might, just based off of only reading Scientist 2's information, I might eliminate answer choice G, because I feel like one of the answers has to have Scientist 2 in it. But then I would probably move on and come back to it later after I've read the other viewpoints. I hope that makes sense. Again, stop me if you have questions. Okay. Does anybody want to, again, we don't have time to read all of the scientists' viewpoints and answer all the questions, but let's pretend that you have time now. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of extra time, and then we'll do the same thing. Raise your hand if you feel like you have an answer. So you should have passage 1, page 40 pulled up. See if you can just skim these and see if you have an answer. You can raise your hand when you do, and if you're feeling brave, you can throw it in the chat. Give it a thumbs up if you feel like you agree with whatever people put in the chat as well. Maybe you guys like a little bit longer of time this time. All right, we have a few raised hands. Does anybody want to bravely put their answer in the chat? No pressure either way. My hint from before is that it's probably not answer G. But other than that, that's me. All right, I'm gonna give you guys like 10 more seconds and then I'll just give you the answer. But if anybody wants to throw it in the chat, Kimberly threw it in the chat. Nice. H. And yeah, give Kimberly a thumbs up if you think that you agree with her answer. But if you have another one, you can throw it in the chat too. All right. I think it's time. Okay, so good job, Kimberly. The answer was H, Scientists 2 and 3 only. As I mentioned before, it might be helpful to use process of elimination, where you might get rid of answer G if you just like know that one of the scientists needs to be Scientist 2, and then read the other ones later. Cool. There might be a few different questions that are like this, asking you to understand the observations of multiple scientists, and coming to conclusions about which scientist would agree with what. Again, this section can be a little bit daunting, so don't feel like you can't skip around if you need to, but I would encourage you to practice on your own with the skipping around to make sure you're comfortable with that before you take it on March 7th. Yeah. All right. The next type of question we're going to talk about are research summaries. So again, this is one of the big 3 of things that are tested. There will always be 3 research summaries on the science test, and it will usually describe a series of studies or experiments. And the questions about these research summaries will probably focus around experimental design and scientific investigation. So this is where that little bit of background knowledge might be helpful if you know about the scientific method, and like general terms like hypothesis or theory and like things that those might mean. Also, when you're approaching the research summaries in general and like reading one of them, starting to look at the questions, it's not necessarily important that you're memorizing facts, but thinking about broad understanding and like general comprehension of what the scientists are trying to get at. So things that you should be able to identify when looking at research summaries, I've bulleted here. So what are the scientists trying to prove or understand? That's really important. Usually you can find that in the first sentence or at least the first paragraph of a research summary. You need to know what changed between experiments. So often, if you remember how the scientific method works, there might be a hypothesis, an experiment, and then they'll try another experiment where they might change the variables a little bit to get closer to the answer that they want. So again, a term that's really important to know is variables. So we're like, what's a variable? Things to keep in mind. And then how changes in the experiment help scientists understand the subject. So why were those changes helpful? What new information did they gain from the second or third experiment that they did, right? You should, again, not be worried about memorizing or like really focusing in on specific details because you can always go back and reference the passage, and please do. As long as you have time, see if you can go back and reference the passage to confirm that the answer that you think you should choose is correct, all right? So real quick, if you guys will turn to page 42, I want to give you some time to practice. Skim the summaries that are here, and then just a really basic understanding after the first, I'll give you maybe 45 seconds, a little longer than 30 seconds. But I hope that you can answer the questions of what is trying to be proven or understood, what changed between experiments, and how did those changes improve the scientist's understanding, okay? So we're not reading super duper in detail. We're on page 42, which is passage 2 at the top, and it has like 3 different charts. Try to have a general understanding after 30 seconds, or 45 seconds. I'm gonna set the timer, okay? And then if you guys will throw your hand up or put up a thumbs up when you've finished, and you feel like you have an answer to these questions, you can go ahead and do that. Otherwise, we'll chat when the 45 seconds is up, okay? Go for it. And page 42. Right. There's your 45 seconds. So hopefully you guys all mentally have an idea of what the scientists are trying to prove or understand, what changed between the experiments, and how those changes improved scientists' understanding. That third question is a little bit more detailed, but broad is okay. Can you guys give me like a reaction, like a little thumbs up, if you feel like you could answer maybe at least the first 2 questions, if not all 3 of those questions? Or yeah, raise your hand, thumbs up. Do you feel like you got that from the first little bit? Okay. Great. So maybe a few of you. If not, that's okay. We can like walk through and think through what kinds of things I would know. So again, since we're in a virtual space, I went ahead and just put what things I noted when I was reading this. So I said that the scientists were trying to understand, so like that the massive CO2 gas when adding various substances to Diet Cola, right? Simple, easy, basic. I found that in lines 1 through 2, like the first little section, like I said, first sentence usually is a good place to look. And then lines 14 through 18, which was near the end of the little text. Between experiments, I noted that the temperature of Diet Cola changed. And then like in another experiment, there was only one substance tested, right? So looking at the descriptions of different experiments, so experiment 1 and experiment 2 gave us those details. And then how do changes improve scientists' understanding? I said that again, really basic, and then I'll look for specifics later. My basic understanding would be that temperature makes a difference in the amount of CO2 gas produced when mint candy is added to Diet Cola. Warmer Diet Cola means less CO2 gas, was my general conclusions that I drew based on the descriptions of the two experiments and the charts that told us what was going on. Cool? Does that make sense? It's important for these research summaries that you're paying close attention to what's being summarized, but also the shared information across across data points. It's just a repeat, I think. But for example, there's a tricky little question that I usually give in my regular ACT class that asks about how many trials was the Diet Cola tested at a temperature lower than room temperature? It's question 14 on page 43. If you look at the data, this is a little bit of a tricky question of a classic way why you need to look at all the data sets to understand what's being tested. Can anybody throw an answer in the chat since we have a little extra time? I'm getting close to the end of my presentation. Anybody have, so question 14, it says, assume that room temperature is 25 degrees Celsius, and how many trials was the Diet Cola tested at a temperature lower than room temperature? So this is across both of the experiments. When was it tested lower than room temperature? Maybe just, again, raise a hand or give me a thumbs up if you feel like you have an answer. Or you can give me your answer in the chat like Eric. Good job, Eric. Love it. We got some people agreeing with Eric on that one. Anybody else? All right. All right, I think if you didn't get to that question, I obviously don't have it pulled up on the screen, but Eric is correct. It's 5. Often my students will quickly say 1 because in the first table experiment, when it talks about, or in the second table, sorry, in table 2 right here is the only table that lists temperature. So 10 is the only temperature that's below freezing on this one. But if you remember in experiment 1, the description tells you that it was added to a bottle of Diet Cola at 3 degrees Celsius. So that was my little trick question. But that's why it's important in these research summaries to get a general understanding, but make sure you're referencing not just the charts, but also the descriptions there so that you know what's going on between the different experiments. Cool? Thanks, guys. Good job, Eric. You're great. All right. So my main point for all of you guys is to please, please, please practice on your own. March 7th is coming up pretty soon, but if you're taking it later, you still have a little bit more time to practice. Just like the reading portion, as I talked about last week, your science score will be improved the most through just like consistent practice with comprehension of the science terms and the way that it's presented. So see if you can practice your own timing. So using those first 30 seconds of a passage to get the lay of the land, and then the rest of the time to look at questions and reference back. So you should be spending about 5 to 6 minutes on one passage and a set of questions. That doesn't take you very long. You can do maybe one practice a day or a few more now that you're getting a little closer to the test to practice your own timing and get used to like that first 30 seconds in your head and then moving on to the next set of data and questions after about 5 to 6 minutes, okay? Also, I really want you guys to practice reading charts and graphs and interpreting them well. The quicker you can note like which direction, what's being measured, different keys and things, the better you'll be able to answer those questions quickly and move on to the next ones. Also, you don't have to stress so much about like studying specific science terms. That's why I think practice is the best way to improve, but making sure that you're up to date and remember what those basic science concepts are, especially around the scientific method and experimental design. So again, knowing terms like variables and like experiment, theories, hypotheses, things like that will be the general understanding that you need to do well on the science portion. Cool? Again, as a reminder, you can use this amazing document provided by Mary that gives you a practice test and answers at the end too, so you can check yourself. You could do these few passages and just use those 5 to 6 minutes to try to get through and practice your timing. You can use and find practice tests and ACT books in your school library and your local library. There are lots of places to find tests and practice and test your knowledge. So the more that you guys can get used to the timing and work on your excitement and stamina to stay excited about the science portion at the end, the better you will be and the better you'll do. Cool. That's all I have content-wise for you guys. I wanted to throw this up here again if you guys want an ACT prep course to go to in person. I'll also say over spring break, which I know will be after you guys take this ACTU at school, if you're taking it on the 7th. Over spring break, if you live in Nashville, we'll have some practice tests that you can do in your local libraries. So if you want more information about that, you're welcome to ask me about it after, like at the end, or send me an email or whatever. Yeah, all that good stuff. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Nina. Appreciate it. We do have about 15 minutes left, although I'm not going to keep you until 4:30 if we get through everything. Do you have any just general questions about the test overall? It may not be about science in particular, but questions about the ACT test in general. Again, you can put them in chat or come off from mute and ask them. Sometimes that takes a little less time, a little less effort if you just come off mute and say, oh, this is my question. It looks like you guys know it all and you're ready to go. Most schools are testing on March 7th. There are a few that are waiting until the next week, March 14th, and just one or two that are actually waiting until the week after spring break. I see someone typing, so I'm going to go ahead and chat just a little bit while we're waiting for those questions to come up or comments. Just so you know, if you're a junior, this is likely your first go round on the ACT. There is a senior retake in October, and so I would take advantage of that spring break opportunity if you're going to be in town, because just because you take it in March doesn't mean you're done with it. Yes, thank you, Jacqueline. Yeah, so Oasis, who Nina works with, is offering practice tests, and so the link is in the chat now about that spring break opportunity if you want to do that. So I think that's a really good idea to take care of that. One of the things Nina kept mentioning, don't leave anything blank. This is true for every single subject of the test. So if you feel like you're running out of time and there's 5 questions, 6 questions, more than that questions left, pick your favorite bubble and just complete that bubble. You are doing this test online, so you don't have to color in a bubble. You just have to click. But if you are down to 1 to 2 minutes and you know there's no way you're getting through all those test questions that are left, fill in a bubble. Choose an answer. Don't leave anything blank. You get points for getting things right. They do not take away points if you get something wrong. So if you happen to click that right bubble when you're just clicking to fill something in, you may get yourself some bonus points. They will not take away points for if you get something wrong. So that's probably my biggest thing I hear about. I can see reports from practice tests and the number of questions students leave blank, and it just breaks my heart. Unless you guys have questions or want some more general information, we are good to go. Again, this recording will be available by the end of the week. I will email out the direct link, but it is also on the MMPS YouTube channel. On their if you click playlist, you'll see ACT prep videos. We did a whole series last year. Those videos are still available. Those are actually the ones you'll see on the MMPS page at the Metro website. And I'm going to put that address. It's where you want to register for this webinar, but there's a lot of videos on there and a lot of other information. Other than that, I'm going to let you go. You have a good evening. Work on your homework, study hard, rest well, and I know you guys are going to do great. You know you have my email address, so if questions come up, feel free to just reply to that email I sent yesterday or the one I will send this at the end of the week. And ask me a question and I will be happy to get the answer for you. Have a fabulous day. Thank you for coming, and hopefully we will see you soon.